Montana Territory, June 1879. The sun was already high when Odessa Kline stepped off the eastbound stage into the dust and judgment of Dry Creek. Her boots hit the ground with more weight than grace, and the silence that followed was louder than the wind across the street. Her coat, too heavy now for summer, did little to hide the curve of her belly. She was 7 months along. No one helped her with her trunk. A man in a brown vest glanced once, then turned back to the porch of the general store. A woman with graying hair crossed the street, her chin lifting slightly as she passed. Even the dog lying under the saloon steps didn't move. Odessa knew this kind of silence. It had followed her from Denver, from Cheyenne before that, and before that, the little clapboard house in Kansas where her father had died with a bottle in his hands. Folks always had a way of looking at a woman like her alone, pregnant, no ring, no man. They judged first and never asked questions after. She squared her shoulders and lifted her trunk herself, dragging it onto the boardwalk. She walked past the mercantile, past the barber's, past the church with the white steeple and the small graveyard beside it. She tried the boarding house. "No rooms," the woman at the front desk said before Odessa even opened her mouth. "I can pay," Odessa said, her voice steady. The woman's eyes dropped to her stomach. "Still no rooms." Odessa nodded once, turned, and kept walking. She tried the widow who ran a small bakery. She tried the sheriff's office. She even asked the preacher. No one wanted her. By mid-afternoon, Odessa sat on the edge of her trunk beneath the cottonwood tree at the edge of town, the one that grew crooked near the path to the river. Her feet ached, her back ached, and the baby inside her kicked like it knew the world was no place for softness. She pressed a hand to her belly. "I know," she whispered. "I know." Dust stirred on the road as a rider approached from the hills, tall in the saddle, slow and easy, like a man with no one to impress. His horse was a deep chestnut, the kind that moved like it understood every step. He rode with one hand on the reins, the other resting on his thigh. He saw her before she saw him. She did not stand. The man dismounted, tied his horse to the low post, and walked over. His boots were worn, his shirt sun-faded, and he wore no badge, just a hat pulled low and eyes that held no judgment. "You need a place to sit besides that trunk?" he asked. "I asked already," she said. "Everywhere." His gaze moved to the town behind them, then back to her. "They always this kind." "I am pregnant," she said plainly, "and not married, so yes." He looked at her for a long moment, not her belly this time, her, then he held out his hand. "Come," she looked at it, weathered, calloused, strong. "What for?" "I got a cabin about a mile out, empty but clean, you can stay." "What do you want in return?" "Nothing. I do not need charity," he shrugged. "Then call it kindness." Odessa hesitated, then she stood. She picked up her coat, brushed the dust from it. Her muscles screamed from the weight of the day, but she lifted her chin all the same. "What is your name?" "Rhett Sutter." "Odessa Kline." He nodded once, then reached for her trunk. "Come on, Odessa." She followed him. They rode in silence for a while, her on his horse, him walking beside. The sun dipped lower and the hills turned gold. The cabin came into view tucked against a bluff with smoke already curling from the chimney. A corral out back, a small barn, a pump for water. He helped her down without touching her skin, just a steady hand under her elbow. Inside, the place was plain one room with a bed in the corner, a table with 2 chairs, a stove, shelves lined with jars. "There is only one bed," she said. "I will take the floor." She turned to him. "Why are you doing this?" Rhett took off his hat, ran a hand through his hair, and looked at her straight on. "My mother was turned out of town once. She died in a ditch outside of Fort Laramie. No one helped her. I swore I would not be like them." She had no words for that. Instead, she sat in one of the chairs, her hands folded over her stomach, and for the first time in days, her shoulders dropped. That night, Rhett cooked beans and bread and gave her the bed without argument. She lay there in the dark and listened to the sounds of a man who kept his word boots coming off, the soft thud of him settling on the floor, the faint rustle of a blanket, no questions. No looks, just quiet. In the morning, Odessa found eggs on the table and a fire going. Rhett was outside chopping wood. She watched through the window. He moved like someone who did not need noise to fill the hours, Like someone who had learned to live with silence, she stepped out onto the porch. "I can help," she said. He paused, looked at her, and nodded. "You can stack." And so she did. Days passed like that. Odessa helped where she could. She cooked sometimes. She cleaned the shelves. Rhett repaired a broken hinge on the door and brought in a second chair from the barn. He never asked who the father was. She never offered. But in the quiet moments when the fire crackled and the only sound was the wind outside, she found herself watching him. The way he moved, the way he spoke only when needed, how he never looked at her with pity, only with calm. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted everything gold, Rhett came in with a small bundle of wildflowers. He set them in a jar on the table. "For you," he said. Odessa stared at them, then up at him. "Thank you." He nodded once, then looked away. But she saw the way his jaw tensed, like he was trying to hold something in. Later that night, as she lay in bed and he settled on the floor again, she whispered into the dark, "Rhett, yeah, do you think people can start over?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I think sometimes that is all people can do." She closed her eyes, and for the first time in months she dreamed of something other than running. The grass around the cabin had grown tall in the early summer warmth, brushing Rhett's boots as he checked the fence line. Odessa stood near the water pump, sleeves rolled high, rinsing the last of the linens she'd washed in a tin basin. Her hands moved with a rhythm she hadn't remembered learning, but it came back to her now muscle memory from another life before the train, before the silence of empty rooms. The child shifted low inside her, a slow push outward. She paused, one hand pressed against the small of her back. Rhett looked over, nodded once, then returned to his work. He never asked if she was all right. He simply made space for her to be. By the time the sun dipped behind the bluff, Odessa had hung the last of the sheets and was sitting on the porch steps, bare feet stretched toward the dirt. Rhett came up from the pasture with his hat in his hands, shirt damp at the collar. "You get much sleep last night?" he asked, eyes on the horizon, some. He lowered himself beside her, keeping a careful distance. The quiet between them stretched, but it wasn't heavy, just unspoken things resting in the air. "I heard a name in town today," he said finally. "Kline." Odessa's shoulders tightened, but she didn't move. "You have a brother." "Had," she said. "Elias rode with a freight line out of Missouri, died 2 winters ago. Wagons broke through the ice near the Platte." Rhett nodded, slow. "Someone thought you were his widow." Odessa looked down at her hands. "Wasn't even his wife. Folks assumed, so I let them. It made things easier for a while." "You always travel alone," she glanced at him sideways. "Not always by choice." He didn't press her, just leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Got a letter last month," he said. "From my aunt in Bozeman. She heard I was still breathing. Wants me to come help with the cattle drive next spring." "You going?" She's kin. "But this place, it quiets something in me. Don't know if I'm done with that yet." Odessa watched the sky fade to rose. "I never stayed anywhere long enough to know what quiet felt like." Rhett was silent for a moment. Then, "You want to?" She turned her head, met his eyes. "I haven't thought that far ahead," he nodded once. "When you do, if you do, you'll be safe here." They didn't speak after that, not until the stars came. Rhett lit the lantern and brought it out to the porch. Odessa stayed seated, her hands folded over her stomach, the night air cooling the sweat on her skin. The next day brought a rider to the cabin, a lean man with narrow shoulders and a horse that looked near spent. Rhett stepped out with his rifle tucked low in his hand, not raised but ready. Odessa stayed inside, watching through the window. The man's voice carried, looking for a girl, tall, brown hair, about 7 months gone. Rhett didn't flinch. "And who sent you?" The man scratched his jaw. "Other way around, girl left behind a horse and a debt, name's Jessup." "I collect for the saloon in Cheyenne." Rhett didn't answer right away. Then, "Ain't no girl here, just me and my land." Jessup looked past him toward the cabin. "You sure?" Rhett stepped forward once. "You got business in Dry Creek, I'd recommend you get to it. Otherwise, you're riding hard for nothing." Jessup hesitated, then spat in the dirt and turned his horse. "Ain't worth the trouble," he muttered and rode off. Later, Odessa stood at the table, hands stiff around the edges of a plate. Rhett leaned by the door, arms crossed. "I didn't owe them money," she said. He didn't speak. "I left a horse, that's all." The man I came west with, he lost it at cards. When he cleared out, they came after me for what he owed. I walked out before they could take more. You don't have to explain. I'm not ashamed of surviving. Rhett's jaw shifted, but his voice stayed calm. Didn't think you were. She looked at him then. Why'd you lie for me? Because you're not a debt. You're a person. Her throat tightened, but she didn't let it show. She picked up the plate, set it into the basin. I can work, she said. Sew, mend, stitch leather if it's not too thick. I'm not just taking space. You're not, he answered. But if you want to earn your keep, we'll start with the barn roof. Leaks like a sieve when it rains. She smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. It was small, uncertain, but real. All right, she said. They worked side by side for the next week. Odessa stitched grain sacks, patched his coat, and found a rhythm in the days. Rhett taught her how to check the traps near the creek. He never touched her without asking first. One evening, he brought in a crooked bundle of dried sage, set it near the hearth. For the smell, he said. Helps sleep come easier. Odessa touched the edge of the bundle, let her fingers linger. I think maybe, she said quietly, I'd like to stay. Rhett met her gaze, something unspoken settling behind his eyes. You'd be welcome, he said, and for the first time she believed it. The first rain came in late July, heavy and sudden, soaking the earth and turning the path to the bluff into a slick ribbon of mud. Odessa stood in the doorway, watching the clouds roll across the valley like a tide. Her hair stuck damp to her neck, but she didn't move to brush it back. Inside, Rhett leaned over the stove, coaxing a reluctant flame to catch under the damp kindling. Wood's too green, he muttered. There's drier bundles under the eaves, she said, already reaching for her shawl. I'll get him. He didn't wait for her protest, just stepped into his boots and disappeared into the downpour. When he returned, soaked through, she handed him a towel without comment. He dried his face and arms, then tossed the dry logs into the firebox. The flame caught this time, slow but steady, and the warmth crept out into the room. Later, as the rain softened to a whisper against the roof, Rhett sat at the table with a tin of nails and 2 broken chair legs laid out in front of him. Odessa stitched a worn flannel shirt by the window, her needle flashing in the lamplight. She didn't look up when she spoke. You ever have family of your own? He ran a thumb along the edge of the wood. Had a woman once, long time back. She leave. She stayed. I didn't. Odessa set her needle down. Why? He didn't answer right away. The rain had stopped, but the sound of it lingered in the walls. I was 20, he said finally. Didn't know how to sit still. Thought hard work and good intentions were enough, but I kept looking past her, like something better was waiting down the trail. And was there? No, just more trail. She picked up the thread again, but her fingers moved slower. She must have cared for you to stay. She did. I didn't know how to carry that. Odessa looked at him then, her voice quiet. You think people ever learn how? He met her eyes. I think sometimes they do, if they stop running long enough. Outside, the clouds broke open, revealing the first stars. The days turned warmer again. Odessa moved slower now, her belly pulling her forward with each step. She took more rest, but refused to stay idle. Rhett didn't argue, but he added a second stool by the porch railing, carved each evening with his pocket knife until it matched the first. One morning, she found a wide-brimmed straw hat hanging by the door, smaller than his, with a strip of faded calico tied around the crown. Found it in the barn, he said when she held it up. Figured you'd want something to keep the sun off your neck. She didn't thank him aloud, but she wore it that day and every day after. One afternoon, while she shelled peas on the porch, a figure appeared at the edge of the trees, a young boy, maybe 12, barefoot and thin, with a canvas sack slung over one shoulder. Rhett stepped out from the barn, slow and even. You lost, he called. The boy hesitated, eyes flicking between Odessa and Rhett. Looking for work, he said. My pa passed last fall, been drifting since. Rhett nodded once. What's your name? Caleb. You know horses? Some. You eat much, not lately. Rhett jerked his chin toward the pump. Wash up. Supper's near ready. That night, Odessa added another plate to the table. Caleb ate like someone who'd learned not to expect seconds. He didn't speak much, but his eyes followed every movement, sharp and quiet. Rhett gave him the cot in the corner and told him there'd be chores in the morning. After the boy had gone to sleep, Odessa stood by the window, arms folded across her chest. "You sure about this?" she asked. "He needs a place." "So did I." He looked over at her, voice low. "I've got more room than I thought." She turned from the window then, something soft shifting behind her eyes. "You ever think," she said, "how strange it is? A year ago, I wouldn't have taken a man's help if he begged me. Now I'm here patching your shirts, cooking your beans, wearing your hat like it was always mine." "It suits you," he said simply. She moved toward him, slow, careful with her balance. When she reached him, she placed her hand over his heart, fingers splayed flat against his shirt. "I think I'm done running, too." He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She leaned in then, pressed her lips to his with the kind of certainty that comes after every door's been closed, and one finally opens. It wasn't hurried. It wasn't sweet, it was real. When she pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. "You stay, Odessa, as long as you want." "I want a long time," she whispered, and in the quiet that followed, the night held its breath. The wind shifted in late August, carrying the scent of drying grass and distant pine. Odessa felt it in her chest before she noticed the sky, a restlessness that moved under her ribs. Like the baby inside her was listening to the land and knew change was coming. Caleb had taken to the routines quickly. He rose before dawn, worked hard, and spoke little. That morning he was out by the creek repairing a broken snare when Odessa stepped barefoot onto the porch, one hand bracing her back. Rhett was oiling a harness, seated on the edge of the corral fence, his sleeves rolled to the elbow. "I've been thinking," she said, easing down beside him. He looked up, waiting. "I want to give birth here, not in town, not with strangers." He nodded once, steady. "You worried it'll come early?" "I don't know what to expect. My mother didn't live long enough to tell me much. The women I worked beside in Kansas City said first ones are stubborn. But I'd rather be safe than scrambling." "You want someone here with you besides me?" Odessa drew a slow breath. "There's a woman 2 valleys off. Her name's Marion Lott. Rode past her place once before I met you. She's a midwife, maybe still is." "I can ride out," he said. "Be back by dark." Odessa studied him. "You trust Caleb here alone? He's got a good head. I'll show him where the rifle's kept." She nodded, then rested her hand on his arm. "If she won't come, we'll find another way." "She'll come," he said. "You asking is reason enough." He left before noon, taking a saddlebag and a canvas roll of oats. Odessa watched him go until the dust of his horse faded into the hills. The day moved slowly after that. She shelled corn, swept the corners of the room, and napped when her back ached too deep. Late afternoon, Caleb returned from the creek with a small string of trout. He cleaned them outside, careful and quiet. "You ever see a birth before?" she asked, not looking up from the stitching in her lap. He hesitated. "My aunt had twins once." "I remember the screaming." Odessa laughed, the sound catching her by surprise. "That's not comforting." "I didn't mean it bad, just, you'll need someone steady. I ain't squeamish if it comes to that." She set down her mending. "I think you're steadier than most grown men I've met," he shrugged, but his ears turned red. Evening came on with a burnished sky and the hush of insects in the grass. Rhett returned just past sundown, Marion Lott riding close behind him. She was older than Odessa had remembered, shoulders broad, eyes sharp beneath a sun-creased brow. She dismounted without needing help and looked Odessa over like a rancher assessing a fence line. "You're farther along than they think in town," Marion said, stepping inside without invitation. "And you're carrying low. Could be next week, could be tomorrow." Odessa looked to Rhett. He didn't show surprise, only stepped back to give space. Marion set her satchel on the table, unlacing it with practiced hands. "You got clean cloth, boiled water, and somewhere soft to lie," Odessa nodded. "Good," Marion said. "Then I'll stay." That night, Odessa couldn't sleep. The air hung heavy in the rafters, and her body felt stretched thin by weight and worry. She rose and stepped outside, the boards cool beneath her feet. Rhett sat on the porch, legs drawn up, eyes on the pasture. "You always sit up this late?" she asked. "When storms are close." "There's no clouds, not that kind of storm." She eased down beside him, her belly brushing her knees. "I wasn't supposed to keep it," she said. "Back in Cheyenne, the man I was with, he didn't want a child. Said it'd ruin everything. But when he left, I couldn't." She stopped, swallowing. I couldn't leave it behind too. Rhett didn't reach for her, but his voice came quiet and sure. You didn't? I don't know if I'll be any good at it. You will. She turned her head, her voice raw at the edge. How can you know that? Because you stayed, he said. And every day since, you've chosen to keep staying. She closed her eyes then, her breath catching. I don't know what this is between us, she whispered, but I need it to be real. He turned toward her, his voice steady. It is. She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. He let her, his body warm and solid beside her. They sat like that until the moon rose silver over the ridge. Inside, Marion slept in the chair, boots still on. Caleb's breaths came slow and even from the cot. Odessa whispered, when this is over, I want to build something here. With you. Rhett didn't answer with words. He just reached for her hand, laced their fingers together, and held on. Marion stayed close once the signs began. She didn't fuss or hover, just kept her hands busy with boiling cloth or checking the fire, speaking only when needed. Odessa's labor came soft at first, like ripples tugging from deep inside, then gathered strength without pause. The air in the cabin thickened, time drawing tight around each breath. Rhett stayed outside. He chopped no wood, mended no tack. He just sat near the barn with his elbows on his knees and his hat beside him in the dirt. Caleb sat across from him, back against the post, legs stretched long. They didn't speak much. When Marion finally called out, Rhett rose so fast his boot caught the step. Inside, the room was dim, lantern trimmed low. Odessa lay against the pillow, her skin slick, hair plastered to her temple. Marion was kneeling at the foot of the bed, her hands steady, already wrapping something in linen. A girl, she said without looking up. Strong lungs, too. The infant's cry was thin but sure, rising and falling like it knew it had to earn its place. Odessa reached weakly, eyes still half-lidded. Rhett crossed the room and knelt beside her, his hand finding hers. She clutched it hard, though her grip trembled. You've got her, she whispered. He looked down at the child Marion laid on Odessa's chest, her skin flushed, fists tight against her chin. Odessa's tears came quiet, sliding into her hairline. Rhett leaned in without hesitation, his lips brushing her forehead. She's beautiful, he said. Odessa tilted her face toward him. So are you. Marion took the afterbirth without ceremony, cleaned the linens, and left them alone. Outside, Caleb busied himself with the horses. When Rhett came out sometime later with a blanket in his arms and a look in his eyes that Caleb had never seen, the boy only nodded. He didn't ask to see her. He just said, she'll need a name. Odessa's thinking on it. You look different. Rhett smiled faintly. Feels different. Inside, Odessa had drifted into a quiet sleep, the baby curled against her collarbone like she'd always belonged there. Rhett sat by the bed, watching the rise and fall of both their chests. He didn't touch the child. Not yet. But he kept his hand on the edge of the mattress, close enough. By morning, Odessa named her Ruth. She was my mother's sister, she murmured. Only one who ever stayed long enough to teach me anything worth remembering. Rhett repeated the name once, then looked at the baby. Ruth Sutter. Odessa turned her face to him. Is that what we are now? He met her gaze. If you want it, she reached for his hand. I do. They married in the yard 2 weeks later. Marion stood witness, along with Caleb, who wore a shirt that Rhett had let out at the shoulders. Odessa walked barefoot, Ruth bundled in her arms. The preacher rode out from Dry Creek, said little more than the necessary vows, and left before the sun reached its peak. There was no feast, no music. Just a table with bread and honey, a jug of creek water, and the sound of wind moving through the grass. Odessa wore a blue ribbon in her hair. Rhett wore his best shirt, the collar stiff from washing. He kissed her slow, one hand at the back of her neck, the other cradling Ruth between them. Odessa leaned into it with the kind of certainty she had never known in all her years of running. That night, after Caleb had gone to sleep and Ruth lay swaddled in the cradle Rhett had carved from pine, Odessa sat beside him outside, their shoulders touching. I didn't expect this, she said. Not any of it. I did, he replied, voice low. The day you sat under that tree with your eyes full of fire. She turned her face toward him. Why didn't you say anything then? He ran a thumb along her wrist. Because I knew you'd have to come to it on your own. She leaned into him, her cheek against his shoulder. I'm here now. They sat there until the stars came out, the cabin behind them lit soft with lamplight, the child inside sleeping, the land around them alive with the hum of crickets and far-off owls. In the months that followed, Odessa taught Ruth to sleep through the night, to grasp her father's finger, to smile without reason. Rhett built a second room onto the cabin with Caleb's help. Marion came by once with dried herbs and left with a jar of blackberry preserves. Odessa mended more than shirts. She mended the aching places in herself slowly, without ceremony, one quiet morning at a time. And Rhett, steady as ever, gave her space and warmth and the kind of love that didn't ask to be named each day. By the first frost, they had planted roots so deep the land itself seemed to know them. And for the first time in her life, Odessa Kline Sutter no longer waited for the ground to give out beneath her feet. She had built something that held, and it was enough. It was everything.